as we've studied it and thought about it more and more, it seems that it's very important in that what we found challenges a lot of assumptions that game studies researchers have made about games. And it could just be that Faunasphere is the one weird exception and it's just totally wrong. Or I think it just means that we need to be more careful, in how we go about framing and studying and delimiting our objects. So to just get started, kind of the overall question framing this is, what happens at the end of the virtual world? And what can we learn from it? So to give you a sense, has anyone here played Faunasphere? Yeah, no, okay. So if this video works. This was the launch video. You never hear this music in the game itself. Okay, so as you can see, it's like a total WoW clone, right? All right. So this is, what the game actually looked like while it was still going. And it was a Flash game, browser-based. I'm supposed to be more quiet, I'm sorry. No? Okay. And when it was first launched, it was just accessible via the web, and then it integrated with Facebook about 6 months later. And you, as the player, you control one of these fauna on the screen at a time, and you don't actually see yourself. You're sort of positioned as a caretaker, and your job is to, as you saw in the promo video, take care of the fauna, raise them, hatch eggs. You had your own kind of private space in the world that you could decorate with items that you purchased, and of course you could interact with other players. The game was free to play. There was a premium option. As you can see here, I think this was Jason's account. At one point, he had 4 fauna. You, as a free player, you were only allowed to have 3 at a time. If you paid up to premium, you could have as many as 30. And these are just some names of the types of fauna that were available. One of the big deals was, of course, hatching different fauna because they had different genes built into them for different physical outlooks, for physical markers, and there was no science to it at all, but players had fun just sort of swapping eggs and trying to crossbreed and get these sort of elusive fauna that the developers put in from time to time. And you also had, as I mentioned, your own sphere that you could decorate as you wished. It was where all of your fauna appeared, so they could sort of run free in this space. So that was the game. As I mentioned, this was the end of the world. The game went offline about a year ago. I'll talk in more detail about that in a moment. But when we were interested in thinking about this, we said, well, who else has written about the end of virtual worlds? And almost nobody has. I mean, there are a lot of games in virtual spaces that are still going, but obviously some have gone out of existence. Celia Pierce's work on Uru is probably the best known, but even hers is more about what happened after Uru closed, which was the Myst kind of game. And she followed the players into spaces like there.com, which has also since closed, and Second Life. And Papayeris and Polymenakou studied the players of Earth and Beyond, and mostly about their collective memories of the space and what happened when they went to EVE Online and kind of had to adapt to that new space. So really, we had a few ideas from these about what to maybe expect to see when a game closed, but not a lot to go on. So as I mentioned, this is based on a larger study. When we started the game, studying the game, it had almost just launched, and sort of the prospects were bright. We had done a large survey. We had done a few interviews with the community managers and developers. We had gotten some data, back-end data from the developers themselves. We did observations. But when we found out the game was closing, after the game closed, we did email questionnaires, interviews with 26 players, and we also did observation from kind of the point of the announcement to closure, and then some informal stuff beyond that. And what we found actually, and this is one of the more interesting things, is when we talked about closure or sunset, which is what the game industry calls it, that seems to signal a kind of discrete moment or event. Even the language I'm using says that. But really, it was more multi-staged than that. And we found, at least in this game, kind of 4 components or elements or stages. And I'm going to go through those now. So the first one was the announcement of the closure itself. So this is the image that appeared on the game's forum website. And this was February 15th. Big Fish Games. They sent an email, they posted it to their forums. It started out by saying, "It is with a heavy heart that we are letting you know that we will be phasing out Faunasphere beginning today and ending on March 15th. So there was a month's notice. It continued on, saying it would be free to play, they were going to refund recent purchases. It closed by stating, "You have been more than a customer to us. Faunasphere is a family. We are so grateful for the time we had to build a world with you." And it was signed the Faunasphere team. So that was the announcement. And then there was the reaction. If you read, game forums, this is not anything unusual. I should point out one of the things that makes Faunasphere different and challenges is that probably the majority of players are female. They are between the ages of predominantly 35 to 64. Many of them we found in our surveys had never played an MMO before. A certain percentage didn't even know what an MMO was. This was their first kind of online, persistent game experience. And it was strange how much some of their reactions and attitudes paralleled what you would expect to find from like a player of WoW. So, there were people who were very just kind of upset. I'm not sure how much you can read, but there's a player saying, "This is where I met all of my best friends. I've had the greatest journey. I'll be missing all my friends. I'm very sad to see it go. I'm going to cancel my Big Fish membership. I'll take my money to Pogo from now on." So players were obviously upset. Some players quickly turned much more practical. "Hopefully we can all find a new home. We are refugees forced out of our homes. We will lose our babies and our precious spheres, but hopefully we can find a replacement. I'm going to try a Mystical Land," that's another free online game, "when it launches, but I'm sure I'll never be satisfied." So players were, and this was something that other researchers found, shocked, upset, angry, sad, all of these emotions. And there was just this kind of disbelief in a sense, because they felt like there had been no indications prior to this that the game was in trouble. This is a little out of place, but just to show you, I mentioned the game ran on Facebook as well. The numbers here actually continue after the game closed, and I think this is just people logging into the Facebook page. We were curious to see whether there was like a huge spike of activity after the announcement, because this is kind of from the announcement to the close, or if there was a decline, and you can see it just kind of goes up and down. But that was the announcement. So now the pre-closure activities, the players have a month, to kind of figure out what they're going to do. And I should also mention, kind of after that announcement, they were very upset with the company. Their rage was fueled, those of them that were angry, by just a continued silence on the part of the company. After that initial announcement, they set up an FAQ page, but many of the players wanted to know why this was happening. Wasn't it making money? Many of them didn't seem to quite understand the economics of virtual worlds, but the fact that it was never explained to them, that the president of the company never said anything directly, just really sort of enraged them. One of them said, "I've totally quit Big Fish as a member in protest, and they can rot from the head down for all I care. I am friends on Facebook with most of the moderators, and it nearly killed them too. I do not believe the party line one bit about closing it down, but I certainly do not hold the employees accountable for it. It had to be that pig Thalen. I defriended him in all the BFG sites." That's Paul Thalen, the head of Big Fish. Okay. So So there's the anger. They have a month. What do? Well, curiously, we noticed that some players kind of shifted what they were doing in the games. So there were, instead of quests, they were called goals in Faunasphere. But players, sometimes who are very interested in just, kind of decorating or hatching, suddenly shifted their play styles. Here, Beatrice says, instead of just exploring and decorating and chatting, I spent my time zapping to level those fauna. I got the 4th gold collar March 14th. Those 4 level 20 fauna were the only ones I took to that level in 2 years. Level 20 is the maximum that you can reach with a fauna. And when you get to that level, they have those little collars you perhaps saw around their neck. That's how they zap pollution. You can get a gold collar for them. It's like the one kind of signal. It's like, like the purples, right, in WoW. And so that's what it is. So this is somebody who never cared about that kind of thing before this and suddenly, is driven to do that. We also saw people kind of tidying things up, getting things ready, spending, more time with them. But it was interesting in that, for this person at least, grinding almost, which had never been anything of interest to her, suddenly became a priority in her play. So again, there's that new play style. Some people, significantly went after hatching a particular type of fauna that they really, really wanted to get before the close. They also changed the play frequency. So Rebecca says, I played a lot, even more than usual, including staying up all night the night before the game shut down. I finished decorating several spheres and leveling up as many fauna to level 20 as I could. I took screenshots of every sphere I created and of my final flock of fauna. Now, don't think that everybody just suddenly played a lot more. Like, you remember that graph I showed you. For example, another player said, I couldn't play. I cried all the time I was on, so I quit. Somebody said, I played very little after the announcement because I felt so upset and betrayed. And somebody else said, in the first week, I was too upset to play. After that, I was able to play a little, but not nearly as much as I had been. So players had different reactions, to this. For some, it drove them, for some particular sense of completion, whereas for others, it was almost as if, the announcement just signaled the end right then and there, and they just simply couldn't go forward. There were players, as one of the posts mentioned before, who started searching for new places. On the forums, they had set up, players who kind of did these expeditions, much like Pierce found with the Eruvians. We're going out and we're exploring new lands, and here's what I report back, kind of what's the most similar space we can find to Faunasphere. And this is actually a mashup of characters from Glitch, which is where some players settled, and the Faunasphere animals. So those are the first two. The third stage was the actual closure itself. This is kind of the day of it. And kind of going back to that literature, we thought, well, there's going to be some big event. Maybe all the players will gather together. And this is kind of one of the public spaces where we are, and you can see some other players gathering. And we had encountered players. It was, the population seemed higher than normal on the final day. We saw people kind of walking around. Some told us they were taking screenshots and going on memory walks and that kind of thing. As it got closer, you saw these big messages flash across the screen. People started gathering like a couple of these public spaces and chatting and that kind of thing. But interestingly, we expected many more people, or avatars rather, in these spaces than we found. And when we did the interviews later, we found out that for many people, that's not where they were. They were actually in their spheres with their fauna, okay? And this is what they were doing. They were taking care of their fauna. They said, I made sure they had food, and they acknowledged that these are not real animals. But they also, at the same time, said, this was very real to me. I was very upset. People took the day off work. They took out their fauna around. They played with them. They made sure they were okay. And that's what they did, until the world ended. And then this was the screen that ended it. And then there was the decline. So this is the final stage of a closure where, what do you do afterwards? I mentioned Glitch before. That's the top left. Some of the players went there. And Facebook actually played a large component role in kind of helping people pass the decline, which is quite ironic. Faunasphere Memories is a Facebook group that the players set up. It's a closed group. And you probably can't read this. This was actually a screenshot I took this morning, but it says, the post says, on March 15th, it will be 1 year since Faunasphere closed. I wonder if Big Fish Games knew the impact it would have, and 1 year later, we're still missing it. The group currently has 461 members. They're not all active now. I would say that in the first few days after the closure, it was kind of like walking into a very, very crowded room where people were constantly posting and updating and sharing stories and sharing screenshots. But I think it's still relatively amazing that a year from now, the posts might be every few days and then they spark activity, but they are still at least every few days. So there's a core group that's still pretty active. This was just a wiki that was originally set up for the game with the players acknowledging that, you may be coming here to kind of remember certain things. Players have been pretty active still in creating these sort of mashup images. They don't just post screenshots of their places, but instead, they draw, they do the mashups. The bottom left one is actually a player putting together images of their octopus fauna, which had an invisible head. I'm not sure if it was a glitch or a feature, but they liked it. And then the hair is actually from their character from Glitch. So there's this kind of play going on. And on the right, this is just a note that somebody had posted with one of their fauna, just in the fauna saying, like, it's okay, everything's fine, I'm playing with the babies, we're all happy, and you can kind of go on. There was a player gathering in Florida at one point shortly after the closure where some players showed up. But in part, they are pretty active. They're still very upset, a certain group. Some of them did, as I mentioned, go to Glitch and a few other games. They formed sort of small micro-communities there and have enjoyed playing those games, but they're also still active on this original site as well. So for many of these players, the closure, it was certainly an event, but it didn't mean the end of the game for them. So just some conclusions. I had originally posted a note to the Facebook group, saying Jason and I were studying Faunasphere and the players, and they had known about this before, and I'd like to send a questionnaire to people who were interested, and lots of people quickly responded yes. And somebody actually posted this, oh God, I'm filling out the questionnaire for Mia regarding Facebook, and I can't stop crying. I can't believe how much it hurts. And I think it's just a way to reflect on, if you study players, that it's not just, the game that has an impact on them, but our research can too. And I think it's kind of amazing that even just, the questions that I sent to this woman about the game provoked such a strong response in her. And, I think we have, some level of responsibility to players if we study players. But kind of more generally, closure, I think we're arguing is a process, not an event, and there may be components of it that take on more or less significance for different players in different games. And probably the most important point is that a game's lifespan has to be taken into account. Just as we need to study like a game or like a server, players, we found, radically change their play style, their play frequency, based on the fact that the game was closing. Now, obviously, not every game closes, but think about like WoW and like a major patch or a new upgrade. These are things that players take into account, and I think we need to reconceptualize play as being tied to these contingencies. So I don't know if it's typical or not, but I think we just need more research into this to find out. And this was something I had mentioned last year about Faunasphere. These are people who do not identify one-to-one with their avatar. They see them very much as virtual pets, which you could see with the quotes that I listed earlier. But that's, again, something that I think is significant and we need to take more account of. And with that, thank you.
Thanks a lot. There are some questions, like two. Okay, 1, 2. You not, you are asking all the time.
Is there any kind of non-governmental organization to protect the rights of the player? No, it's okay, it's only a joke. For me, it's a kind of warning in order to push up perhaps more open source and initiatives for multiplayer online games, perhaps.
Yeah, I mean, the players themselves, I know with Uru, Celia had found that some of the players were actually trying to build, their own version of the game. For many of these players, as I mentioned, this was their first online game, their first MMO, and they had played hidden object games before this. Some of them obviously are pretty tech savvy if you look at their mashups and the videos and things they create. So far, I haven't seen any discussion of building one, but strangely, as I mentioned, Facebook, the players, many of them that I talked to, actually hated Facebook and felt that when Big Fish put the game on Facebook, it was the beginning of the end with all kinds of rude players. But now the thing is, sort of the game lives on for them through Facebook. So there's this weird irony here.
Thank you very much. They're closing the Lego Universe servers today.
Oh.
So.
Hey. And we're here not studying again.
Yeah, exactly. There isn't that much activity on Twitter about it, though. I mean, only a couple of tweets. But I think you'd probably be interested in trawling those boards for the kind of thing.
Yeah.
I'm also thinking that maybe any kind of sort of sorrow kind of support group analysis in sociology would probably yield some results that would be applicable to this thing about anger and denial and sort of acceptance and moving on and all of these sort of pop culture phases, but I think they're identifiable in also the Lego Universe sort of reactions. And I think important, a very naive conception about what it takes for the producers to run these things, I think, especially on part of the children that have been participating in this. They have no idea the kind of Weber interdependencies they're entering into, which I think is quite sad for these kids, actually. So, but very interesting, thank you.
One of the cruelest things as well is that some of the most hardcore of the Faunosphere players were actually, they were recruited, they were the original beta players of the game. And Big Fish had recruited beta players from its most committed group on the forums from its single-player hidden object games. And these were the players that they most alienated with the closure. And many of them said, I will boycott. And I don't know how to measure, I don't know how much impact that actually had. But certainly the continued silence on the part of Big Fish really went a long way towards fueling that anger towards the company that perhaps might have been mitigated.
I was kidding, the last question, but please.
It's not a question, it's just an observation, actually, because it was very interesting, that whole presentation, because I noticed, I was also going to mention for Suvik's, in relation to Suvik's talk before, that this frame question of this is a game, this is not a game, is manifesting very well. You can see it very clearly that for these players, the game and the real world are it's very porous, the boundary between this is a game and this is not a game. And I think that is a very relevant area. And the most interesting thing was that you as a researcher also become part of the real world, and you should maybe say this is research, this is a game, this is another research. So it's, in terms of framing, it's very, very interesting, your description of that process, I think.
Thank you. Yeah.